Hello, everyone. Welcome to part two of our lecture on geopolitics. This is the part two of our uh, second lecture, or first full lecture. So welcome again. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the broad strokes, the history of geopolitics, but we're going to get in a little more detail here. So um, we're going to go into the long history of geopolitics as well a little bit. So it is important to look back to see how we got here within our contemporary world order and the current paradigm in which we are in. And the history of, if we look back, we can see that the history of trade began with the earliest human communities. Even before nation states, we have what were empires which traded, cooperated, went to war, and conquered one another. So even before the official development of the nation state, you still had geopolitical relations that were impacting a variety of factors that led to particular outcomes for individuals living in that period, right? So the long history of genocide as well and destruction, which also continues to weigh on the status of geopolitical relations between communities, groups, nations, and states. So such actions were driven historically also in many instances by material interests where certain geographic economic advantages have historically led larger and more powerful communities to invade and exploit these resources and the people who lived in these lands. And such conflicts have also created geopolitical advantages and disadvantages for states, which continue to resonate within contemporary politics, right? Due to historical location of groups and nations within different communities around the world, the long histories continue to weigh on global relations, so global geopolitical relations. So when we think about trade throughout history, one of the most important examples is the Silk Road, which was active for over 1,500 years between 114 BC to the 1450s AD. So the Silk Road refers to the territories of modern Central Asian states, there's currently modern Central Asian states, which link trade routes between Asia and Europe. Um, the history of such territories and the geographic importance of these territories continues to contribute to sharp rivalries between powerful nation states around the world over the future of these territories and the political affiliations that they have geopolitically. So then we can skip up to in Europe, where we had the Hundred Years' War. Between 1337 and 1453, you had various armed conflicts throughout Europe between kingdoms of England and France. The wars during this period would cool off at various points for the simple fact that war-age males had largely been killed in conflict. So this was a very important time too, because this was leading to the development of the first standing armies in this period since the Roman times. So there's lots of technological advances that happened during this period. But following the 30 Years' War, uh, which was between 1618 and 1648, you have one of the most damaging wars in you have the most damaging war in Europe at that time, which continues to have ramifications on contemporary politics. You can look at a country like Sweden, which is a neutral country, which is not aligned with anyone, because the Swedish Empire was dragged into this conflict way back in the 1600s, and did not wish to be dragged into any conflict ever again. Um, but in the end of this conflict, in 1648, you had the development of the Treaty of Westphalia. It came with it the acknowledgement that things could not continue in such a way, and hopefully that peace and negotiation would take place as a result of this. So the Treaty of Westphalia created what we now recognize as formalized countries within the international system. It invented the nation state as we know it now, as we still continue to know it. Where each nation had a state, which never actually happened in reality, as many nations and ethnic groups did not get their own state, but it did formalize particular countries and particular nations. However, while this was an attempt to bring peace and eliminate war from global politics, it did not do this at all, and it actually ushered in a new age of colonization, which we will discuss. So peace was not the result of the creation of the nation state through the Treaty of Westphalia. Rather, conflict moved to other parts of the world, often through very violent forms of colonization and imperialism, which brutalized non-European peoples in places like North America, South America, Asia, Africa, Australia, with horrors that you can, I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Um, and what we had during this time was also an increase in trade, but it was not really trade as much as it was the direct exploitation of labor and materials from the colonized world, um, the colonized lands that were outside of Europe at the time. And these goods were traded much more equitably within Europe itself, rather than the way that the forms of exploitation that came with European colonization of the developing of formerly colonized states. So, but you did have a period where more states were interacting with one another, which is also a massive development in geopolitics. So skipping ahead to the 20th century, because this is not a history class, and I'm sure while these broad strokes are very interesting, we want to get into the 20th century. And in the 20th century, we had the development of international organizations. For instance, the United Nations, the European Union, the World Trade Organization. And these transnational, sometimes referred to as liberal institutions, are inventions of the 20th century with ramifications on trade, geopolitics, and development. Also, we can look at these institutions as also not always representing like a global interest, but rather representing the interests of powerful nation states, which is the way that they're sometimes criticized by smaller actors within the international system. So we can look at the way in which liberal institutions can be maybe skewed towards the interests of more powerful leading nation states. A more critical analysis can look at these things as well. So we also have the rise of nuclear weapons, which is, like we mentioned before, a major transformation, as now individual nation states have the ability to wipe out entire populations of the planet. If it is interpreted within the very narrow national security interests of a particular state. So if geopolitics or regular diplomacy fails, a single country can inflict unspeakable horrors based on their own national security interests, which may differ drastically from the national security interests of other states. So we can look at the kind of risks that this poses as well. Also, there was a recognition that in a globalized trading world, there's a need for more buyers. And the best way to ensure more buyers is to create less poverty in the global sphere, globally. So you have the creation of international aid, which is not necessarily born of altruism, the morality of individual states or citizens within other states around the world, but rather it can be understood as part of the self-interests of other states, which recognize the value in preventing poverty and the ability to sell more goods globally. So rich states seek to help poor states to benefit the entire geopolitical system in the 20th century, and that's why aid has become so important in geopolitics. So in the 20th century, we also see massive technological advances, massive trade and development, the end of colonization, often after the materials from these colonized territories have been massively exploited. But we see massive population movements as well, massive advances in technology, specifically the ones that are most relevant to the age of globalization, is the massive proliferation of communication technology and transportation, and how this weighs on geopolitics in various different ways, right? So, however, that being said, we also see a much larger divide between rich and poor. You can look at the Oxfam, the concentration of wealth that's happening in contemporary world order. You can recognize also the drastic differences that this has created, and the drastic wealth gap this has created for all peoples, and even in the age of globalization and the kind of homogenization or the expansion of global markets did not trickle down always to those the losers of globalization, if you will, the people who did not benefit from these massive trade arrangements, the globalization of the political economy, but rather have been impacted negatively by such things, right? Whether it be through competition or otherwise, or exploitation, et cetera. And we also see a massive divide between individual states, right? We see the massive divide not only between different peoples around the world, but also the massive wealth divide between states. So, and how these are also products of history, et cetera. And many of the historical things we already discussed regarding colonization and otherwise, right? So we also no longer have formal empires, the same way we did for instance, the 17th and 18th century, but we have massive trading blocs, which are also competing for power, such as European Union, for instance. So I'll be posting a video on Blackboard, which will also discuss trade and its history, which you'll be watching this week. So keep an eye out for that as well. Okay, so the last thing we're gonna discuss this week is power. Oh, so yeah, this is a continuation of my previous slide, the continued development of report. So moving on to this, we're going to discuss power this week. So power is simply, we're going to understand power very simply as the ability of one country to influence the behavior of another country. This is kind of the boiled down simplest definition. So we'll define this power as A's ability to get B to do what A wants, despite B not wanting to do so. So this kind of formula of power can be, applied to various different social relations, but we're going to apply it to international relations. And we're going to discuss the various ways in which power is exercised within the international system or the world system. So if we understand power, there's various different ways we can understand power. So countries have broadly two different forms of power, hard and soft power, and we'll discuss each of them. So the first one is hard power. And a hard power, it includes military power, economic power, the ability to sanction, and the ability to intimidate rivals. So a nuclear weapon, as we've already discussed, being one of the most important developments of the 20th century, is the most extreme case of hard power, right? Which only a select few states, I believe now it is only the United Kingdom, Russia, France, China, India, North Korea, Pakistan, and Israel, which possess nuclear weapons. And obviously this has impacts on how they're able to engage with both their perhaps rivaling states or just in the international community more generally, right? So the hard power dynamic from nuclear weapons transforms the capacity for states to influence others, right? So they can bring direct coercion and hard power to hurt those who oppose them, and always can back what they define as the national interest, which might have nothing to do with either the interests of citizens within that state, or it's an interpretation of those in power who determine the national interest, and it's unique from state to state. But they can back that national interest with the coercive force of nuclear weapons. So hard power is a very traditional use of power, used obviously frequently throughout history, as we've discussed briefly with the wars in Europe historically, et cetera, and as well as the wars in the 20th century. And we see how this traditional use of power continues with, for instance, with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where Russia is obviously using its hard power to achieve its national interest in Ukraine. Right, so I mean, we can see various different examples of this around the world, including by Western states as well. And soft power. So soft power is famously coined by the famous political scientist Joseph Nye, and developed the concept of soft power in the late 1980s. And to boil it down to its simplest definition, it's getting states to do what you want them to do without having to threaten them, right? So it means dialogue, diplomacy, diplomacy can come in various ways too. It could be academic exchange, it could be economic cooperation, it could be scientific cooperation, and you see various examples of this. One of the famous examples, obviously, is things like the space program and the different forms of scientific cooperation that even have happened historically between rivaling states, such as Russia and the United States. There's been some sort of soft power exercised and cooperation that happened through space research, et cetera. You also have population exchanges. You have natural resources that states can trade and sell or donate internationally, so they're more likely to have other states align with their interests when they do such things. There's also global image, which is a huge part, where the actual likability of a state and the cultural attractiveness of a state, et cetera, can actually contribute to states' willingness to co-sign their global initiatives or the initiatives that they view as both within their national interests and the interest of the world system. Canada used to have what was called a very strong global image. It's been tarnished in various in various ways in the last couple decades, mostly during its economic practices abroad, particularly in things like the mining sector, and also the broad willingness to participate in militarism abroad, especially those aligned with the United States, et cetera, has been has had some negative impact on its global image. And states also differ quite drastically on the hard and soft power that they're able to deploy, right? So some states have lots of soft power and very little hard power. So you can think of South Korea, for instance, would be one example of this. Some would be the reverse, where Russia has lots of hard power, less soft power related to it's a strong global image, et cetera, right? And some have both. Some have the ability to exercise soft and hard power very effectively, such as France, the United States. And some countries, for instance, in Central Africa, et cetera, have not been able to have either a lot of hard or soft power that they've been able to exercise for various reasons, whether or not the country has been engaged in its own domestic issues, or it suffers massive levels of poverty and underdevelopment. So you can see the examples in which states can exercise both, neither, or one or the other, right? And it's kind of up to you, the analyst, the political scientist, the person engaged in global business to measure how you interpret these forms of power, right? Okay, so I think I'm going to end today's class the way I would usually end my classes if we were to meet in person, which is I like to hopefully have you think of these aspects of geopolitics on your own time and kind of mull them over while you're writing your assignment. So I think that these questions each kind of will help you think about the questions I ask in the accountability assignment. So for instance, what type of power is useful, especially in 2022? What countries have the most hard power? Who has the most non-coercive soft power? I'm having you read The Top Risks of 2022 by Ian Bremmer. He is a political risk analyst and consultant and founder of the Eurasia Group, which is, like I mentioned before, a private risk consultancy firm. So it's interesting to see how those engaged in political risk analysis measure the risks that are posed by different aspects that face that impact geopolitics, whether it be dynamics linked to the hard power rivalry between states, the status of economic cooperation, et cetera. So I think that this is a good overview for you to kind of understand what those involved in measuring the political risks to global business, what they perceive as the top risks facing our contemporary world order. So it'll provide an overview of various crises and issues facing geopolitical relations within contemporary world order. So I think it will be very beneficial to all of you to kind of, even if it's just, I think that this will be this along with the videos will be very, very, will provide you a strong background to the kind of contemporary issues in which we're currently faced with. And perhaps they don't. Perhaps you believe, and there's space in your assignment for this, perhaps you feel that there's a geopolitical issue facing your own country, for instance, that is neglected by these lists, and maybe it's a larger issue than those that the Eurasia Group are taking into account for. So lots to think about. So you have this accountability task, which is due at 6 p.m. Barrie time on Friday, and you must make sure that you attach the accountability form to the assignment. There's no working in groups. You must submit it through Turnitin, which is on Blackboard, which I've been told that you're all familiar with by now. the instructions are on Blackboard, and you must use your sources. You must use sources and cite your work properly with the APA format. So there's absolutely no copying and pasting or using a paraphrasing program, which I've been told is a big issue within the college. So please just cite the work that you're using, and don't just paraphrase. Cite all the sources that you're using, um, and you must put quotations around all the words that are not your own. It's very, very important. Academic honesty is extremely important to Georgian College. So you must cite all the sources of information, or else it's plagiarism. And remember, it's worth 5% of the grade. It's a very short assignment. It's only 300 to 350 words. So you have to make sure that I can't stress this enough. You must cite with an APA format, following each of the APA format requirements. It's a major part of the assignment. It's a major aspect of the assignment is properly submitting in this format. So you must write down all the sources you use using APA format, and the format of the assignment must follow precisely the APA format. Remember that an A assignment is one that contains an exceptionally strong analysis, cites the information correctly 100%, and contains and discusses the course materials. And so it just meeting the requirements of the assignment doesn't necessarily mean you will get an A. That's a good grade, meeting the requirements, but an A is one that goes, again, above and beyond, and follows to a T all of the requirements, including the format requirements, and contains a very strong analysis, right? So like I said, I've been instructed to submit all issues of plagiarism directly to the program coordinator. I can't stress this enough. Let's just save each other the embarrassment of having to go through this process, and just make sure that you cite all your information, and make sure that you're being honest with your assignments. I provide a lot of materials on the Blackboard, so there shouldn't be a need to go too far beyond the course materials. But if you do use things outside of the course materials, sources outside of the course materials, just make sure they're strong academic sources. They're not, on a random blog, or a YouTube comment section or anything of the sort. Like strong news articles, etc. In and try to stay anchored within the materials that I provide. You may also cite the lecture if you need to, but don't rely only on the lecture. I want to make sure that you're all doing your readings as well, because remember, part of these assignments is to make sure that each week that you're keeping up to date with course materials, and you're reading the materials I provide. But you may cite the video I put up. You may cite any materials I put on Blackboard, but just remember, you don't want to drift too far outside of the materials that I provide. That being said, like I said, I've been informed that you're all familiar with Blackboard and turned in by now. Remember that by 6 p.m. Friday, the assignment is due, and there's no late assignments beyond that time. So 6 p.m. Friday, I've been told there should be no conflicting classes with anyone. I've already double checked with the program coordinator. So there should be no disruption in handing in the assignment by 6 p.m. on Fridays. I'd like you to read over the accountability questions very carefully, and as well as the Eurasia Group top risks. So yeah, I think that, just remember that the due dates are very important, and I don't set the I don't make the rules as far as when assignments are turned in. So I require them all to be in by 6 p.m. Friday. That gives you a full 5 days to look over this material. It's a very short assignment, so I think that there's no reason why everyone can't pass this initial assignment. So that being said, I'd like to thank you all for bearing with me this week and listening. I look forward to reading all your assignments and getting to know each of you through your assignments, and the various interesting backgrounds and the things you bring to this class, because I know each of you have a unique experience, whether it be academically or where you're from, etc. So it's very interesting to see how this plays into your interpretation of geopolitics as well. So I look forward to a very exciting semester, and Yeah, thank you all. And this will be the format for me for each week moving forward. It'll be probably about 2 videos. Yeah, that's all I have for this week. So thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And I look forward to reading your assignments. Bye bye.